Let's welcome our panelist, Angela Chambers, who serves as an office manager. She has an MBA and she's a registered nurse. We have already met Dr. Ruth Williams, past president of the Academy, and of course leads a quite sizable private practice group. And Dr. David Calkins, who's the vice chair of research at Vanderbilt Eye Institute, and he'll be adding his expertise with regards to integrating research in job interviews. So Ruth, I'm going to start with you. We've talked about mistakes that young doctors make when negotiating their first contract. Let's first talk about what mistakes do practices often make when they're negotiating their first contract.
I think a common mistake I see people make is trying to get the practice can out of the young ophthalmologist. We're talking about a multi-decade relationship, and really the thing that's going to make the practice most successful is to make the young ophthalmologist most successful. So regarding that person as truly a part of your team and not someone that you can use to, subsidize your bottom line.
All righty. So then we'll take a step back then, because you've interviewed many prospective employees. And you touched on some of them earlier this morning. What are some of the most common mistakes that young ophthalmologists make during the time of negotiating?
Well, I think Mr. Gallo, the previous speaker, touched on what one of the most important points of all is, and that is negotiation is a great process. It's a process of getting to know one another, of finding out what each other's priorities are. It is not adversarial. It's a tool, and you should come into it with the idea of win-win and your opportunity to express yourself. Read a book on negotiation, and I know it's really helpful to get a third party also, but you're bringing your heart and your values to this, and that's extremely important, what you want and what you think is very, very important.
Okay. Angela, as an experienced practice manager, what are some red flags that we need to know about when prospects are negotiating the details involving future buy-ins and opportunities to join the practice?
I think, first of all, you have to really define what that partnership means to that particular practice, because it varies. For some, you think you're buying into a practice as an equal partner, and you find out after the fact you're not an equal partner, you're actually an associate. So that's a key element. The other thing is that you feel when you're buying in, are you buying into the practice? Are you buying into the surgery centers? Are you buying into research? Are you buying into real estate? You need to define what that partnership entails. You also need to look at the cost for that buy-in. Are there any non-tangibles? I mean, what is the goodwill amount that's been factored into that? What is the buyout strategy? You should leave or a partner leaves the practice. Are you then also paying for that person to leave? So those elements have to be defined. The other thing is your buy-in based on, can it be dealt with as a management fee, as they stated previously, so there's no taxation issues. So you can use it as a management fee, which basically passes IRS requirements, and you can take that buy-in as pre-tax dollars. The other element that you really have to be cognizant of is when they're establishing an amount for that practice, what are the details of that amount and how much of that is factored in based on fixed assets? Is it based on a compensation model of how much a partner will make over time? Because with the changes in the reimbursement models that were going to take effect in 2018 for CMS, maybe the price that's being set today at your buy-in may not be a realistic value. It may be much less based on the compensation models that are now coming down the pike. So those are really, and really at the time that you sign a contract, that's when you really want to have those details of that buy-in defined. The other element is that you also want to look at the term of the buy-in. Sometimes you will be given an agreement that will say, oh, you'll start buying in day one, and you think, oh, that's a wonderful thing, and I'm going to start putting compensation in even as an employed physician, only to find out maybe a year or two later you're disenchanted and you've already put all those dollars into this partnership that you now do not want to be a part of. And how do you get those monies out, or can you get those monies out? So those are things to think about.
I think I need to sit down. That's an awful lot of... How many are hearing this kind of information for the very first time? Yeah. How about that? Good morning, doctor. How are you? Yeah. So let's go back. Let's take a giant step back. You know everything. We know nothing. All right. So there's this practice. And I really love this practice, and I think I'm going to spend a long time with this practice. I am going to contribute to this practice, and hopefully I will inure some of the rewards from this practice.
Correct.
So it's expected that somehow there'll be an opportunity, I'll have a chance to become one of the financial partners of the organization, regardless of how it's labeled.
Correct.
Okay. Just throw a number at me. A typical 3-doctor practice. Well, how much money are we talking about?
It varies, depends upon the specialty.
We want granular answers.
Okay.
Throw a number at me.
So, you know, in a retina practice, it can range anywhere from $500 to $1 million buy-in.
Oh, God. Cash.
Yeah. But pre-tax dollars.
Oh, she says that.
Any.
She says that with a little tender voice. But it's pre-tax. Where? By the way, do you know I'm already 320 underwater just coming to working for you? Where am I going to come up with $500,000? Well, it's a better practice, 750. Where am I going to get that kind of money?
Well, that's where you have to look on your return on investment. Is that practice generating that kind of income to really support that type of buy-in?
So it's going to come out of my paycheck.
It's going to come out of your paycheck, your bonus incentives, those kinds of things. And if you're buying into the real estate and you're in a great market where real estate, you know, is really plush, or if there's other revenue streams that you're buying into, such as an ambulatory surgical center, those revenues are not out of sight.
Ruth, do doctors go in naked like this without any foreknowledge of this and are able to navigate this?
Well, we have a pretty standard package, and we make it as clear as we can up front. Some people want more details than others, but you know, we have a pretty standard package of 3 years as a non-partner, and then if you're going to stay, you get the privilege of giving us some of your money back. And it's very well defined how the practice is valued. Interestingly, your point about the value of practices can change over time, and we're having that happen. We're re-evaluating how we value our company because the dynamics have changed, and it's a huge deal because you're asking your senior partners, hey, we want to value this company differently. Actually, we want to value it less per share value. So I think a really good practice has a very active model for how you can retire people and bring in new people, but it's very tricky. And I'll just say that what we do is we have a buy-in to the practice, and we have separate buy-ins for real estate and ambulatory surgery centers. So typically people can't afford to get into the real estate or the ASC until later. So usually people are bought in around year 7, and then they start buying into the other things. But it's expensive. Fortunately, if you're in a growing, vibrant practice, it's a really smart thing to do. If you're in a practice that's on the downturn, you could get hurt.
Dr. Calkins is sitting there saying, I'm so glad I'm in academia. But Twitter has a question for you, and we heard from Twitter, and they want to know, for academics, the first part of that question, is there negotiation for appointments within academic departments like there's negotiation in private practice?
Everything's a negotiation.
Yeah.
Everything. From the day you step in for your first
The
interview.
university has a straight boilerplate contract. You need to sign here in box 14.
No, nothing straightforward at a university. I think, you know, from my perspective, and obviously we're talking about folks with an academic ilk, and can be research, can be clinical academic, can be anything like that. But you step in and you're going to negotiate. You're going to negotiate with someone like me. And I think that it's a different kind of negotiation. Okay, so once you reach the point where you say, look, I have a research interest, I have an academic interest, here's what my interests are, this is what I want. Once you've reached that point, we've already done the base calculation of the value added by adding this faculty member to our clinical practice, which could be 2 days a week, could be 3 days a week, could be 4 half days a week. Whatever it is, we've already done that calculation. And now at this point, as you're negotiating, you want to ask yourself the question, how can I best leverage what I've already accomplished? Once you've been there, you've already written the papers, you've already had exquisite training. You may have had a PhD as well as an MD. You've gone through fellowship. You might have even done a postdoctoral fellowship. You've done all of those things to earn the negotiation. But at this point, what you want to do is you have to come in with as specific a plan as possible. And to use the parlance of the city where we're holding this meeting, you can't come in and just shoot the moon. Because at that point, you're going to lose favor, lose the goodwill factor with the person that you're negotiating with. So what you want to do is have a very, very specific plan of what it is you want to accomplish, how you're going to accomplish it, the collaborations you're going to initiate, the people you're going to meet with on a daily basis. And the very first thing you want to do is establish that commitment to time. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see, and it's always 8 months after the clinician scientist has arrived, okay? They come in, they establish the practice, they're doing well financially, but they make an appointment with me and they say, I don't have any time for research. And I say, well, what did we put in your offer letter? And we look at the offer letter and we realize that there's nothing in there for protected time. You have to be very, very specific on the time that you ask for, and then you need to protect that time. But remember, once you ask for that protective time, department's already running a deficit for that day. That's time away from the clinic where you're not generating revenue. And so the idea is we're going to make an upfront investment in that time with the hopes that you're going to bring in grants and prestige to the university later. And so ask for the time you need, be realistic about the time that you need, and then have a plan on how to fill that time. And if you don't have a plan, then you're going to lose credibility with the negotiator.
So how does a rookie develop such a plan?
Make certain that you come prepared with conversations from your mentors that you have. And we keep going back to this point of the importance of mentoring. Don't come in blindly. Talk to the people that you've trained with. Talk to colleagues at other institutions. Say, look, I want to study genomics of glaucoma. I want to study the proteomics of macular degeneration. I think I need a day and a half a week to do that. How do I get that time? What are the things I need to fill that time with in order to justify it? And I think justification is really the big thing. If you just come in and say, look, I need $2 million in startup money and I need 2.5 days a week for research, point blank, that's your bottom line, then all of the goodwill up to that point will have been wasted. Because at that point, we're not going to take it seriously anymore. So talk to your mentors and be very, very, very specific.
Okay. I want to go back to the issue of doing it alone versus partnering with somebody to help negotiate a non-academic employment opportunity. In most cases, Ruth, your doctors come in without anybody else. They're not represented by anybody else.
Most cases not. I think some people will hire a lawyer to look over it. I'm fine with that. Here's my advice to you. 2 things. Number 1, read the contract yourself, every single word in it, and take notes. Don't rely on someone else to read through and pick out what's important. My second piece of advice is find someone now before you have a contract who is, has a good business mind and runs a practice and say, hey, when I get a contract, would you be willing to look at it with me? Because a lawyer or a consultant has their own radar screen, but someone in the business can look over it and say, this smells fishy, this doesn't, I like this. And the other thing that they can do is tell you which things in that contract are likely negotiable. You don't want to come in and make a big deal about things that are harder to negotiate. I'll tell you one thing that's everything's negotiable, but this one would be a really hard one for us. We make everybody work on Saturdays. If you don't want to work on Saturdays, you don't get a job at our place. So, my advice would be don't come in and try to negotiate that away. Try to negotiate something you can actually have more leverage on, and a colleague, a mentor can help you identify what those things are. And also what things to forget. I bet most of you in the room before this session didn't know that the salary is the least important thing. It is so true. It's important, but it's way down the list. So if somebody had told you that, you can come in and start looking for the things that really matter, like what's the buyout for my senior partners? That really matters, because if you're buying out your senior partners at huge amounts, you're going to be hit, with a business that's in the hole, and you don't want to do that. And those are the kinds of things you might not think about.
Angela, you mentioned 2017 in CMS?
2018.
2018. So many of the doctors in the room here right now are on the edge of being impacted when that time eclipses. So would you restate that one more time, and what their remedy is if they need to have a clause that allows them to renegotiate?
I think in the formula, what you need to do is put in whatever that formula was, that they contracted that amount for that buy-in. You need to put a caveat saying that if there is a change in the compensation structure in future, that amount would be renegotiated and realigned with that present structure. Because CMS, it is going to be based on more of a value-based, more performance-based. You're going to see capitation come back. You're going to see them giving you a defined amount of money for a given disease process. And the committee's already been formed on the CMS side. That's the purpose of all these ACOs that are being developed in the market, because they have to give CMS detailed every year of the progress they're making for those clinical pathways and defining these processes. And for ophthalmology, we're a little bit on the tail end of this, although now we've become front and center because of the cost of biologics and so on. But it's already been done in orthopedics. They're a completed model. Cardiology is a completed model, and oncology is a completed model. Ophthalmology is next on the pecking order.
Remember, you heard it here first. We have a question from a future party goer. Yes?
Hi, Catherine.
Are we on?
Okay.
There we go.
No, it's here. We have time for one question, one answer.
Catherine from Las Vegas. So, Dr. Williams, you had mentioned that you want to be careful about joining a practice that's on its way out. How do you know that? And how do you know if you're buying into a practice that's going to keep growing?
Well, in some ways you don't know that, but what I said earlier in my earlier talk, I think is really important, is transparency of the process, transparency of the buy-in, how things are determined. The more you can know about that, the better. And also look for a growing practice. I think protecting your turf in this environment doesn't work. But if you have a practice that's growing and thriving and figuring out how to do all these consolidations that are going, that's a good bet.